This is AgGrad Live,
We have all of the different segments within the cotton.
the show that explores what it's really like to work in the ag industry,
So making sure that we get policy and regulatory issues
straight from the people who live it every day. Hello, AgGrad Nation. It is Tuesday this week. I think it's such a weird week with Labor Day yesterday, but very glad to be bringing you another AgGrad Live episode. We record these live on Facebook and then repurpose them for our YouTube channel and the AgGrad Live podcast. So if you're not subscribed to those two things, I highly recommend you do that because we are talking to some really fascinating folks. I mean, generally speaking, this year we're highlighting our 30 under 30. And so we have another one of those winners here today. I'm going to bring him on. This is Jonathan Williams. Jonathan, thanks so much for being on the show.
How are you?
So where are you calling in from today?
Sterling, Kansas is my address. I'm about 25 minutes west of Hutchinson, Kansas.
Okay. And you are a regional product agronomist. I want to make sure I got that right. Regional product agronomist for Hoegemeyer Hybrids, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so tell us about the agronomy in your area. I think most people, when they think of agronomy, at least those in the Midwest, think of corn and beans. But what are you working with there mostly?
Well, Hoegemeyer's majorly corn and soybeans and a little bit of sorghum on the side. But of course, in my territory, a lot of dry land. Kansas is a wheat state, so we get to deal with a lot of wheat too, but it's not typically part of our business plan since we're mainly corn and soybeans.
Okay. And I used to live in central Kansas. And so I kind of remember it being sort of a dividing line where west of you, it gets really, really dry. And east of you, it can get pretty wet. So what types of challenges does that present for you in your territory?
It's an interesting job, to say the least. I cover 3 states totally. So going from western Kansas to eastern Missouri and into Oklahoma. So we get over into Syracuse and west. We deal with 14 inches of rain a year, supposedly. At least that's not how it's been the last couple of years. And then we get into where it doesn't stop raining at times in western Missouri, it seems like. But definitely the few years that I've worked for them so far, it's been kind of a roller coaster on the way things are supposed to go geographically. Yeah, it's a very vast difference between what we would call dry land on one side of the country and the other. So.
Yeah, I remember. So I grew up in Northern California, and irrigation is all I'd ever known. And so I can remember I was like in high school when I realized that there were parts of the country that like didn't irrigate. I thought that I just never even thought about it. And so obviously dry land being that receives rainfall. So if you're in a place like California and you're watching right now, you may have learned yourself that in some places where it rains a lot more, you can have dry land crops. Well, as a regional product agronomist, does that mean you're selling to farmers, and what's the product that you're working with, and sort of what's day-to-day look like for you?
My day-to-day is what most agronomists would realize is a lot of road time typically. Especially since I just cover such a large geography, I get to be on the road a lot and see a lot of things. But ideally, this year has been a lot of dealing with flooded outfields, doing replant for the company on customers that we were able to get either replant seed for, or just help them figure out if they wanted to replant as late as planting season got around this year. So this year I've dealt with a lot of planting season problems, and now we're rolling into heavy storm season. And with the planting issues we had throughout the whole Midwest we've had, this is how it's been as far as basically everywhere else on just running into issues just because of the planting season that we got to deal with. But typically on a normal year and some this year, I'll go out and visit with customers, with the DSMs, with other employees at Hoegemeyer, or I'll walk through research plots, what we call impact plots, to look for new products that we can put into the book for the next couple of years and what we think we want to look for in the next couple of years as well.
You mentioned DSM, so district sales managers. Since you have a sales team that you work with, when are you called in as the product agronomist?
Typically, I get to deal with the problems, or I help the DSMs deal with the problems. But otherwise, if it's a good phone call, if we have a new prospect that has some questions about products and he just wants some reassurance on what the ratings say on our book or what people get to see in that area, If the DSM has a new question about products and he isn't sure how he wants to answer the question to that customer, we can go in as a team and work with the customer on what he may want and help him figure out a game plan if he's going to choose us for the next year.
And then if it is a problem, with the product itself, who do you talk to? You're not, the one physically kind of like developing these new products, are you? Who do you go to?
We have 2 product managers in the company, one for corn and one for soybeans and the other crops that we carry. Well, I say that. And then we also have another product manager here in Kansas for sorghum. I try to work with them as closely as possible because they're the ones that pick the products and have gotten to see them for 2 or 3 years in a row before they actually even made it to our book, even more than I have. So I talk with them on general problems. And then if it's a problem more locally related as far as geographically, then sometimes I even talk with dealers that we have on what they've been able to see if they've been a little bit more conscious about looking for things that might stick out in certain products.
And you mentioned travel earlier. I know travel is just kind of like when you're covering a territory, you gotta travel. So that's one thing that comes up a lot is like, it's easy if it's like, well, it's more straightforward if it's like, oh, you're on a plane and you have to stay in a hotel 2 nights a week. That's how much travel. It's pretty defined. But for you, covering a very large 3-state territory, what's travel look like for you on a normal week?
In the winter, it's not much. Most of the winter travel is just visiting with dealers and helping some customers or some dealers getting some seed on their place for the next year. So I don't have to travel near as much. And in the summer, it can get pretty busy. Like right now is my busy time of field days, in crop walking, walking plots, walking with DSMs with customers on what they've seen in the fields. So on average, before I had my kids anyway, I could drive 65, 70,000 miles a year, which isn't as much. And then I've slowed down a little bit since my kids have started growing up some. But like the last month or so, I've probably averaged 2 to 3 nights a week calling and driving almost every day of the week. And then it'll slow down from here on out and speed back up in the spring when planting season kicks back on.
And that travel, generally that's because DSM will call you, say, hey, we have this problem we need to take a look at either on this trial or with this customer, and you're kind of like hopping in the pickup and heading that way. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, and I'm pretty fortunate to be very geographically centered in my region. It's probably farthest away each direction is probably 4.5 hours, which if you get an agronomy job, it's a little bit more closer geography, I guess, driving wise, whether it's for a co-op or something, that would be a lot nicer. But you might be driving just as much. You just might be driving in 3 or 4 counties instead of 3 or 4 states.
Okay. Whenever I talk to, non-ag audiences, the question of GMOs always comes up. So with you and the products you're selling, are all of them, technically genetically modified or what percentage of them are?
I think last year we haven't carried any carried any conventional soybean varieties the last couple of years. The last time we did, we were allocated to sell a few thousand units, and I think we sold less than 300. So we ended up not pushing them all on for the next year. But in corn, we've been dealing with some like dole contracts, and I think maybe Frito-Lay, some of the food stuff. I think they've been pushing some. And I want to say last year our total volume was 2 or 3% maybe in corn. But what we'll normally do is if we have a couple corn hybrids that have been treating us very well or been doing very well in areas that might be in some interesting conventional, we'll actually breed those inbreds or those hybrids that get bred without the GMO traits in them, and we'll sell them as a conventional variety too.
Okay. You talked earlier a little bit about the weather this year and sort of how much of a disaster it's been for so many farmers. What's the crop look like? Here we are September 3rd. So I imagine you all are probably gearing up for a harvest in your territory. What's it looking like?
In most areas, pretty much my whole region has looked very, very well. Planting season was terrible and everything's behind, but even with stuff looking behind, it's looking very good. I don't think we're going to have to worry about an early freeze like some of us north of us might, but it seems like everybody that I've been able to talk to and how things are looking, and especially out east of us where they've been getting quite a bit of rain, things are looking very, very well. And as long as they finish up on time, it's probably going to be just as good or better year as they have in the past.
Well, that's good. I mean, it's great. I think your territory probably has it better than those north and east of you who never, who have so many acres that just never got planted,
Mm-hmm.
which is great for you that you all didn't have all of those same problems. How'd you get into this? I know you're from Eastern Oklahoma, so you're not from Central Kansas. It was a move for you, but how'd you get interested in agronomy, or is this something you always knew you wanted to do?
I definitely didn't think I knew I wanted to do it at an earlier age. I grew up on a cow-calf operation, and I rolled into Oklahoma State working on an ag education degree. My dad was an ag teacher, so I just figured I was going to follow in his footsteps. And after the first or second semester, I was kind of coming home figuring, well, I don't think this is going to be for me. I don't know if I have a clean enough mouth or something to hang out with a bunch of high school kids all day. But I'd always wanted to get my master's though, and I graduated with an animal science degree and was going to try to get my master's into ruminant nutrition or something similar. And that's about the time I met my wife. I'd worked at the research station at OSU for a year, the agronomy research station, just doing work with the professors and helping keep yards mowed and helping with wheat harvesting, simple stuff. And I kind of caught on to that. The next job I had was for a farmer outside Stillwater. Really enjoyed working for him, even though he was both farming and cow-calf. Well, I came up here for a summer, helped with wheat harvest, helped with soybean planting one year. And actually, I really enjoyed it then. And I didn't quite make it into grad school with the animal science department just because I didn't try that hard, I guess I'll be honest. I was thinking I might go to another university, and next thing I know, it's 2 months later and it's about too late to sign up anyway. Well, I walked into the research station at OSU the summer after I graduated and ran into one of my old professors that I had had a chance to work with when I was there working as an undergrad. And I had asked him if he had any open spots for grad school. And this was, I think, third week of July. So school was going to start in a couple of weeks. I hadn't even put in my application yet. He goes, yeah, when can you start? Like, well, I guess I got to get my application in. And he took me. I mean, I think I got approved to go in 2 days before school started, and the rest was history. So, but I don't know. I guess I've kind of figured out it's never too late to ask at that point in my life.
Most definitely. And how long have you been with Hoegemeyer?
3 years, last June.
Okay, 3 years now. And was that when you moved to Kansas 3 years ago?
Yeah.
Okay.
I accepted the position with them in May, and I started June 1st. And then my research plots for my thesis got cut middle of June, and I finished my thesis sometime in July, right before the deadline while I was working for Hoegemeyer. So it was a very quick change.
Oh, somewhere there's somebody listening to this or watching this, and they need to hear this, that you can be an animal science major with the intention of going into ag ed. And if you just kind of try some different things in college and be open to where it might lead, I know for me, I caught on early enough that I wanted to switch from ag ed to agronomy that I actually changed majors and changed schools. Ended up going to UC Davis and majoring in crop science management. Of course, now, I use very little agronomy, but it's such a it's a field that people seem to discover later in life. Like maybe, if you're like me, and I bet you grow up kind of in the show, you show animals, I showed hogs, some people show cattle. And so like, you kind of think, oh, this animal stuff's pretty cool. And then you don't even think about sort of career opportunities in agronomy. And so a lot of people seem to find it later, but I love examples like this where it shows, hey, it's always, it's never too late.
Right. Yeah. And I grew up showing cattle and everything too. And I think I showed pigs a few years, just because of the operation I grew up on. But the networking that you gain from that, and if you're not afraid to network in other areas of expertise, such as agronomy, which you probably know, the amount of people you meet and the avenues that can be taken off those people that you're able to network with is countless and probably priceless too.
Where do you go if a farmer has a problem or a salesperson has a question that you just don't know? I mean, you just don't know the answer to. What type of resources we usually go to first for that? I've
never really been afraid to ask questions, so I've I've made direct calls to extension agents or professors at universities, especially the ones that I know and I've gotten to know through grad school. And then I've actually called dealers right down the road and asked them if they've seen any problems and if their customers. I'm not afraid to put the bird out or the question out to some people that most people generally might not want to ask because they don't want to feel, I guess, lower or whatever you want to call it. But that's probably one thing my dealers have known me to do that I've not really been afraid to, because I think some issues show up more geographically than others. So if I ask a product manager in Nebraska about a problem in South Central Kansas, he probably hasn't, chances are he's probably not run into that issue near as much as somebody in South Central Kansas has. So I try to be more apt to asking who might have a better clue. And so it just depends. I look at university publications, I call product managers, I call professors, just depending on where I think I'm going to find the answer at.
And what did you find hardest in the transition from somebody with such a hardcore animal background to transitioning into agronomy? What was the sort of hardest aspect of it for you to pick up?
Probably, I don't know. I tried to relate as much of it I can. Like I genuinely enjoy going out and talking with dairies and people who do a lot of silage or something that way. Because when you can have an animal science conversation with them and you're not working for the animal industry at all, that seems like they don't mind talking to you because they know you're not trying to sell them something related to those cattle or those pigs or whatever that's in their lot. But probably the hardest transition I've had is just learning the products. Of course, I grew up on a cow-calf operation that if you tried dropping a drill in the ground, you would just break a bunch of discs. I mean, so I didn't come from this type of country at all. So learning differences in geography mainly from how they push their program on the crop production side has probably been the biggest learning curve compared to what I was used to.
And tell me about Hoegemeyer. I mean, what is it a pretty tight knit group, or what do you like most about working for Hoegemeyer?
It is very tight knit. It's grown a lot in the last year with the Corteva merger. When I started with them, the Hoegemeyer grandson was actually still running the company. We were bought out in 2011 by DuPont, so even though we were considered corporate, we still had family running the business. And then with the Corteva merger this last year, we were put together with the New Tech West and the Curry brand. So it's been a little bit of it's been a little tough getting everybody together through those three companies, but so far we've done a pretty fair job of it, especially since we're so spread out from Iowa to Oklahoma and all the way to Western and West Nebraska and Kansas. But yeah, I would say we're considered tight knit compared to most companies. Of course, we all come from different backgrounds with our three different companies, but so far it's been a really interesting merger for everybody to get together and see and really get to know each other, even though technically you might not see each other but once or twice a year.
Hey, Jonathan, can you think of an experience where something happened in your work where you were just kind of a success story where you just felt like, yeah, this is why I do what I do? It's because just maybe something that represents what you love most about your job.
Probably some of the most memorable stuff I've had is we've been trying to help. We'll try to do different things with different products to help ease problems that might standability, for example, in a corn hybrid. Me and some other DSMs have kind of been pushing the idea of pushing low population corn, for example, in areas that might still be able to do pretty good yields for the area. We've been able to help farmers out quite a bit on just realizing the fact that they can save money on some seed and still be able to retain yields that are very profitable, such as we had a dairy down south that we were pushing some low population stuff on some limited irrigation yields. Well, it turns out it rained all year. They had quite a bit of water and they were still cutting way above average tonnage on a 250-gallon well, but they were still cutting 30-ton silage with some hybrids that we were doing just because we were able to find a niche for some products and they've worked very, very well. And of course, in reaction, has made Hoegemeyer look really good too.
And so you sell corn seed that's going to go for both silage and for actual grain, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And what about the flip side? So the tough part about what you do that maybe people wouldn't instantly think of or see from the outside looking in? What's the biggest challenging aspect?
The travel has probably been my biggest challenge. If you had asked me 2 years ago, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. But I got 2 kids since we've started working for Hoegemeyer. So, of course, I like to be home a little bit more often than I used to. It's not been bad. I can schedule my plans pretty well and stay home quite a bit of the time. But definitely being home a little bit more often with my children seems like it pays off, since you don't really get that time back. But
yeah, I can definitely relate to that. I have 2 kids as well, and I used to love travel, and I found out that I still love travel. I'm just not a big fan of business travel.
yeah,
I like the fun kind of travel. The business travel where you got to be away and working, it's a little bit tougher. And so, yeah, I've really, sort of tried to minimize that as well. So how do you balance it? Life has obviously changed. You've got kids now. How do you balance the demands of home with continuing to try to pursue your career? Any tricks you can share with us there?
Yeah, have a really good wife. That's understandable for one. But otherwise, I try to work with my DSMs as much as possible if I'm going to go to their area, especially if it's pretty far travel. We'll try to knock out as much as we can and try to minimize the issues. If it's a customer that might just have a problem of, oh, my corn's turning yellow, why is it turning yellow? A DSM can go out, and if I'm very fortunate to have some DSMs that work with me that are very knowledgeable as well. So when they can get out and the customer can see that they can solve a problem as well, that really helps. And then at least when I'm in the area, we can still drop by and drop in and let them know that everybody's still thinking about them and that we're willing to resolve the issue if he doesn't think it's been resolved yet. But trying to get with your coworkers or whoever you want to call them and just get a plan laid out for how things can be resolved is very beneficial.
Sure, definitely. Well, you can answer this next question 2 different ways, one of 2 ways, whichever you prefer. Either one, what was some career advice you received and followed that was really, really valuable to you, or what advice would you share for other people who want to achieve success like you have early in their career and really want to hit the ground running?
I don't know. I guess growing up, I was never really taught that the world ever owed me anything. But if you do want something, you can't be afraid to ask. So just for example, me getting into the grad school deal, there wouldn't have been many people ask and got a serious response if they would have walked up to a professor and asked, "Hey, do you have a spot open in your grad program 2 weeks before school starts?"
All right.
That's probably been that's probably been the biggest thing I've learned rolling into my career is if you need something, you just need to ask for it or just make a plan to do it. Because if you don't ever make a plan, you're not ever going to hit your goals anyway. So,
what if anything have you noticed changed? You've been doing this 3 years, in the ag industry in general, or more specific to your territory. What changes? I always find, it's helpful to look at kind of what's changing now rather than what do we think is going to change in 10 years, because who knows what the world's going to look like in 10 years. But what do you kind of see changing now, or at least from when you started your career in agriculture or specifically among your farmers?
At least in my industry, it's changed greatly just because of all the mergers that have happened. Corteva, Bayer, Syngenta, ChemChina, whatever you want to call them. It's been I don't know. I guess what the older guys say is they've never seen this much change in the seed industry ever, and it's all happened in the last few years. And I still think there's a lot to go because there are still a lot of private-owned companies, some that are getting back into the business to try and take advantage of this corporate-sized seed industry that we're playing with. And the farmers are noticing that. Some of them are all for it because they know a lot of the pipeline money is going to get pushed right back into the products, which is what we've been trying to do. But that's been the biggest change I've seen. Just I don't know what to expect out of it. I don't know how it's going to go. I think a lot of it's going really well. Some of it may not be going as well. The traits that are getting pushed out, the traits that were good 10 years ago that are literally useless now, or some people would call useless. So I think there's still a lot to be had in the next 3 or 4 years even. But I have no idea how it's going to lay out.
Yeah, I think definitely we've seen the consolidation, in the seed and input industry more than anywhere. It's pretty wild how that's happened. Now you're a regional product agronomist, and I talk to a lot of people that love agronomy but aren't so sure they love sales. And so if they want a position like yours, which is maybe less on sales and more on, say, technical agronomy, any advice for people in that situation? Because when they look at job boards, for example, so many of the opportunities are in sales.
Mm-hmm. Well, say that first part again. I lost you.
Oh, sorry about that. I was just going to say, is there any advice you would have for the people who maybe, they want to be in technical agronomy, but all they see is sales jobs?
I when I was job shopping, I noticed there are a lot of agronomy job openings. So there's clearly a shortage of agronomists in the area, in my opinion. I do think that there's a difference between sales agronomist and technical or product or research agronomist. For instance, I think unless you had 7 or 8 years of experience, a master's was required for a job like mine, which I'm not putting any diss or whatever you want to call it on a sales agronomist job for a co-op or whatever. But I know the sales agronomists are typically more apt to needing to go out and sell product, especially if they don't have direct DSMs that they deal with. But I think that at least it seems like in this day and age, if you're not working off years of experience, a master's probably will be required if you're wanting to do more of the technical side and the product side, getting in on the research and innovation part of the business.
All right, I've got a kind of a curveball for you here, and feel free to say no. But one thing that people ask me, that maybe especially those coming from outside of the industry, maybe they got a business degree and they're like, look, I really want to be in agronomy. A lot of times I'll tell them like, hey, find someone who's doing that and just ask if you can shadow them for the day. Like just ride around the pickup, ask them questions. Like it'll just give you, number one, a good insight into what it's like actually doing the job. And number two, you never know where that relationship will go. If maybe down the road there is an opening and you can get, so are you able to, if somebody wants to job shadow you, is that something people in the industry are open to, or am I just kind of speaking recruiter speak there?
I think most people would be open to it. If somebody legitimately came up to me and asked me, or even called me and asked me for just to sit down and have a coffee, I would be open to it. I'm not afraid to talk to anybody, but I could see that being a possibility. I don't know how I'd do on the liability part of the company, but I guess if they don't get asked, I don't know. I think that it would be okay because, the ag industry is something that needs more light put on it, especially just for the sake of our livelihoods and what's been getting pushed down our throats for the last few years on I guess you could call it the agenda. But so I don't think any agricultural person that is in the sales business, because if you're in sales, you got to get along with people. Mm-hmm. So I don't think any agricultural person in the business would be turning down letting somebody shadow them for a day, or even just having a clean conversation with them on how things work.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I'm amazed at how few people do that. Everybody's got busy schedules. If you're working another full-time job, I get it, but most of you guys are working Saturdays a lot of the year, and so I just think, man, that's such an underutilized activity. And I think in ag we can do a better job, and I'm hoping down the line AgGrad gets better at this for people. We do a pretty poor job of making it mobile for us to fill these positions with somebody who doesn't have the exact background. Like, maybe you're looking for someone who grew up on a farm and has an agronomy degree and wants to live in rural Western Kansas. And that's great. But you can count those people that are available and looking for work probably on a finger or two. So, trying to open it up and make it more accessible for others to check it out, to try it out. And if it's right for them, eventually transition into those roles.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. I've seen, it seems like I've seen a habit of even like animal science people walking into business jobs So at the same time, I don't see if a person was a legitimate interest in the industry and even went and sat down with a manager or sales team leader or somebody in the corporate office, probably wouldn't get turned away immediately, even if they had a business degree, if they came in and showed interest and wanted to have a legit conversation with somebody.
Sure. Yeah. Hey, well, Jonathan, thank you so much for being on the show. Let's wrap it up there. If anybody's listening or watching and really interested in agronomy and wants to reach out to you and follow up, is there a social media platform or an email address or a good way to tell them to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can just find me on my Facebook, which I'm guessing you had a link to, and I have a LinkedIn account too, but I don't get on it much, but I check it every once in a while at least.
Sure. Understandable. Well, congrats again on being part of the AgGrad 30 Under 30. Well deserved, and it's been really a pleasure to talk to you, Jonathan. So thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
All right. For those of you tuning in, we will be back next week with another member of our AgGrad 30 Under 30. I think we're getting into the final third here, the home stretch. So hopefully you'll join us here, join us on YouTube, and subscribe to the podcast, and we'll keep bringing them to you. So thanks so much.
Thank you for joining AgGrad Live. Visit aggrad.com, that's AgGrad, to join the community, create your profile, and learn more about careers in the agriculture industry.